Hello everyone. Mic too? Okay. Hello everyone. My name is Cedar. I am a senior political science and history major here at the University of Florida, and this is my thesis, How to Spot a Cat, a Georgist look at the development of Jacksonville, Florida from 1890 to 1920. You're not going to really understand the title unless you read the thesis, and I'm not going to explain it because I think it's funny. But I am going to leave this picture of a cat up here for you. If you ever get bored, try and find the cat. If you're wondering if you found it yet, you probably haven't. You really know it when you do. So my thesis analyzes Jacksonville, Florida from 1890 to 1920 through the lens of Henry George's work, the political and economic theorist from the late 1800s. George posited that the root of all inequality resides in the way the U.S. taxes private property, as it is incredibly cheap to hold undeveloped land because property taxes are minimal. This encourages the hoarding of land, arguably our most important finite resource. As land is limited and cheap to hold, its monopolization is both likely and detrimental. Labor requires land. One cannot work a field without a field to work, essentially. So landholders ultimately have the power over workers. To sum up Georgism in a single phrase, it would be, because land is cheap to hold, monopolization is incentivized. George proposed an economically viable solution to this, yet his solution is still yet to be implemented pretty much anywhere in this country. But my thesis doesn't actually look at his solution. Rather, I focus on the problems he cited would develop as a result of the way we tax private property, by looking if and why they emerge in progressive era Jacksonville. These issues were production increasing but wages remaining stagnant, land monopolization, and massive inequality, especially in urban areas. Now, Jacksonville was potentially the worst city I could have chosen as an example of the problems George cited. I did this on purpose. I believe that his predictions are so convincing and so inextricably tied to the fundamental treatment of private property in our country that his predictions are going to come true even in the least likely of places. This is what I find. For the majority of the country during this era, land monopolization, stagnant wages, and wages increasing, or wages not increasing, I have to be very clear about that, was basically the rule for the rest of the country. Oil, railroad, and steel tycoons had basically all-encompassing power through the rest of the country, so why was Jacksonville any different? Jacksonville developed extremely late compared to these other industrial cities. This meant it had a much smaller population and land remained cheap for a lot longer than the rest of the country. George's predictions hinge on the difficulty to attain land, so this is major. Additionally, in 1901, Jacksonville had the third largest urban fire in U.S. history. This temporarily reset land prices. Over 1/3 of the country's, or of the city's population was homeless as a result of this fire, just to show you the scale. This one event sets Jacksonville apart from other major cities and creates an incredibly unique case study. For this study, I focused on 3 distinct neighborhoods in Jacksonville for my analysis. These were La Villa, Sugar Hill. These were both incredibly prosperous African-American communities, and Hansontown, which was a bitterly poor African-American community. I wanted to know why. And the answer lay exactly where George predicted, in land ownership. And also, I just wanted to point out, the reason I chose to study African-American communities is a lot of what Avery actually just talked about. As a result of the U.S.'s racist history, African-Americans were systematically excluded from land ownership for the majority of U.S. history, and thus excluded from social mobility. The key difference I found between these neighborhoods was in their origin. La Villa, the prosperous one, developed from a land grant where dozens of African Americans joined together, evenly distributed the lands they were given, and they weren't relying on landlords. They were beholden to no one other than their other community members, and this developed into an incredibly prosperous professional district in Jacksonville. Because they were protected from landlords. because this is one of the key problems George cites with our current system. Landlords can continuously raise rent as long as no cheaper solution is available. As long as there are no alternatives provided, they can keep raising rent, or you have to live somewhere. This is the problem with being able to acquire a large amount of undeveloped land cheaply and hold it indefinitely. You bar future development from happening, meaning no alternative solutions can be created. Hansontown, this is essentially exactly what happened in Hansontown, the bitterly poor area. Workers were kept impoverished through landlord extraction. They were stripped of any opportunity for development and investment, and this quickly devolved into a slum. Now, Sugar Hill is what I find to be the most interesting example. It developed after the fire of 1901, which decreased land values, which allowed for impoverished but forward-thinking African Americans to actually invest in land, something that was impossible in the rest of the country. This is exactly what Joseph H. Blodgett did. LaVilla and Joseph H. Blodgett. Following the fire, he purchased a large tract of land in Jacksonville and developed one of the strongest African American communities in the entire South. His foresight made him the first black millionaire in Florida. And under the protection Blodgett provided, what started as an ordinary community of dock workers and sawmill operators developed into a highly prosperous professional district of doctors and lawyers. Because African Americans could save enough under the protection he provided as a landlord, they could invest in education, in their own land, in a lot of opportunities other African Americans weren't able to, especially in the rest of Jacksonville and the rest of the country at this time. Access to land, as George predicted, was the deciding factor between prosperity and impoverishment in Jacksonville. Blodgett's altruism, this man, was the sole reason Sugar Hill was able to develop and didn't fall into the same fate as Hansontown. Had he been consumed by greed like most other landlords, the neighborhood surely would have failed. So what? Why does any of this matter? Simply, this paradox of poverty in the most prosperous places has yet to be solved in our country. Or at least, the solution has yet to be implemented. The issues George predicted are still alive and well today in the US, and nothing is being done about it. Home prices and the number of people aged 18 to 29 that live with their parents recently hit all-time highs in the past few years. I would like to acknowledge this is not because parents have gotten better, but because the housing market has gotten worse. Home ownership has become somewhat of a cynical joke for the majority of my generation, which is very unfortunate. Only 66% of Americans own their homes today, but this statistic is very misleading. Only 37% of those under 35 own a home. The older generation heavily skews this data with an over 80% home ownership rate. Additionally, repeat buyers are continuing to make up a larger and larger portion of home purchases, pushing first-time buyers out. Personally, what I find the most concerning about all of this, though, is the rise in institutional investors in the last decade. This is defined as any corporation or person that owns over 1,000 single-family homes. Before 2011, there were zero, not a single one in the entire country. In 2022, there were 32 of them, with over 450,000 homes owned combined, with the largest 5 of them owning over 300,000 homes. This only represents about 2% of the country's housing, total housing, but this number is continuing to grow, and their purchases are highly concentrated in urban areas, as George would predict. In 2022, institutional investors own 25% of Atlanta's single home rental market, and 21% of Jacksonville's. And this greatly magnifies their impact. I'm not saying that George's solution is perfect. I'm saying it's worth a shot, because what we're doing right now is not working. With that said, I hope everyone is able to spot the cat. If you weren't, it's right here. is made up with a negative space in the tree. It's so cool. It's really hard to unsee once you see it. Other than that, if anyone wants to hear other miserable statistics from me and my soapbox, I will be by the coffee station all day. Have a good one. Thank you.